Welcome back. Now we're going to take a look at how gender, race, and class show up to create barriers around employment. Much of the types of work available to us are gendered in some way. We might not specifically talk about them that way, though. Instead, we'll talk about them as being logical or technical work, which is gendered male, as men are stereotyped to be more logical than women. Or we'll talk about them being physical, again, gendered male, as men are considered stronger and tougher than women. Other careers people will think of as needing high emotional intelligence, or good listening skills, or a way with children. These are occupations that have been gendered female. Think about how you feel about a male nurse, or a male elementary school teacher, or a female construction worker, or mathematician. These are men and women. There are men and women in all of these roles, but we tend to be slightly uncomfortable with the people working outside of the expected occupations for their gender. This is problematic enough because it limits people's choices. Occupations gendered male almost always have higher average salaries than occupations that are gendered female, though. We pay more for people who can do technical or physical work than those who can do caring or emotional work. And within every profession, regardless of how it is gendered, men tend to make more than women. While there is absolutely outright gender discrimination that occurs at work, there are subtler factors involved in the gender inequities seen in the workplace. We look for certain qualities in employees and in leaders. Because masculinity is the dominant gender, those qualities that are considered optimal for employees and leaders tend to line up with hegemonic masculinity. This results in a situation where men are more likely to be seen as doing what it takes to get ahead, being ambitious, pushing for advancement or preferred assignments, making sure they get recognition for their work. Women, having been taught to be more accommodating, are more likely to try and be team players, to take on work that needs to be done that isn't popular or gets low recognition. As a result, men are more likely to be given larger raises and are more likely to be promoted. However, there's a double bind for women. Women who are more aggressive and ambitious in the way that is usually rewarded in the workplace are behaving outside of gender norms, and thus those traits that are rewarded in men are often seen as negatives in women. A man is assertive, a woman is bossy. A man is ambitious, a woman is seeking power, and so on. A man working 12-hour days is dedicated to the job. A woman doing the same is either neglecting her home life and or children, or is a spinster to be pitied. There are even more subtle examples. Watch comments about female politicians and see how often people talk about just not liking her or not liking her voice without any substantive reason. These are not comments often heard about male politicians. Men look and sound like we expect leaders to look and sound. Despite the increasing numbers of female politicians, we still don't think women look like leaders. In-group bias is particularly problematic for everyone with a marginalized identity, really. We tend to like the people most like ourselves, who belong to the same identity groups we belong to. However, when you have a particular set of identities who are most likely to be making the hiring decisions, you end up with a skewed workforce made up of people who look like them. When people talk about hiring new employees who fit with the workplace culture, this is what they mean. Sameness means there's less friction. However, it also means a sameness of ideas. Workplaces that create a monolithic workplace culture not only tend to discriminate against people with marginalized identities, but also suffer from lack of innovation, which is overall bad for business. Generally, companies that do the best at making sure their workplace is diverse do the best financially. Those that don't are not only hurting people, but themselves as well. Finally, we can't discuss gender in the workplace without discussing the sexualization of women. Much of our culture is built around women being in supporting roles, either as caregivers or as sexual objects. This leads to women who are younger being seen as potential conquests, which leads to sexual harassment. Women who are older, by contrast, tend to be dismissed and ignored. In both cases, the sexual value of these women is put above their contributions as employees, and their work being taken less seriously. We've talked about some of the issues around race and ethnicity that concern employment, such as how Black-sounding names receive half the interview requests as white-sounding names with the same resumes. The stereotypes and biases we have, whether conscious or unconscious, have a significant impact on our ability to determine someone else's ability to perform a job well. This means for many non-white people, particularly those who are Black or Latinx, getting hired for a job they are qualified for is considerably more difficult. There are other barriers created by institutions as well. We'll talk more about this in the future, but we do not have equal access to education. While in theory we have universal K-12 education throughout the United States, it's well known that these schools are unevenly resourced, and that correlates closely with the ratio of white to non-white students. It is more difficult to be prepared to join the workforce if you haven't been taught many of the basic skills required by employers. We'll also talk more about this later, but it's a well-established fact that Black and Latinx people, particularly Black and Latinx men, are more likely to be stopped by police, more likely to be arrested, and more likely to be incarcerated than other races. Once released from prison, these people are often unable to find work because of their incarceration history, regardless of our idealized value that they have paid their debt to society. The fallout from this is like a domino effect. Their ability to earn a living creates a burden. Their inability to create a living creates a burden on their families, causing the family to have more financial stress. This often leads to the formerly incarcerated back to less legal ways of making a living, which should start the cycle of arrest and incarceration again. This domino effect is what William Julius Wilson talked about in his article Jobless Ghettos. The historical problem of redlining has limited where Black people have been able to live, while growing suburbanization has moved many white people and their wealth outside of cities. This means cities have a drastically reduced tax base and are crunched to provide the same sort of infrastructure as they have in the past, particularly for schools. This means much of the remaining city populations are undertrained to join the workforce. Additionally, increased suburbanization has moved many jobs to the suburbs, but poor transportation infrastructure means those jobs are inaccessible for many people living in cities. Finally, poorer neighborhoods are more likely to have a higher rate of policing, resulting in a higher population of people with criminal records, creating yet another barrier to employment. Wilson argues that this contributes to what he refers to as the social breakdown cycle. The abandonment of cities by employers and the resultant poverty takes its toll on the social groups that provide stability in neighborhoods, groups like churches, societies, and neighborhood organizations. Family structures are also hit by adults working too many hours, by absent family members due to incarceration, and by the abuse that happens in part due to the stress of poverty. The children growing up in these neighborhoods are the ones that bear the brunt of the disintegration of social structures. Not only might they miss out on some valuable hard skills learned in school, but they also do not learn many expected soft skills like punctuality, respect for authority, and regular schedules, making them less desirable employees. Many of the problems we see in modern cities can be traced to a single problem: a lack of jobs. The issues of stereotypes and ability continue once a non-white person is hired. The stereotypes often mean that the work done by non-white people, particularly Black and Latinx people, is undervalued, and the assumptions around ability frequently mean that they are not assigned to the more prestigious projects. We talked about microaggressions a bit before, those seemingly innocent offhand comments that people with dominant identities are often clueless are offensive, but for whom those who are targeted are a strong indicator that they are considered an outsider. These are a problem for every marginalized identity, but it's a particularly prevalent problem for non-white people that can cause quite a bit of stress and make them feel particularly unwelcome in the workplace. For example, see the BuzzFeed video in this week's playlist. Finally, there are a lot of requirements or norms for workplace environments that are based on white culture standards. Many of these revolve around dress code expectations, whether stated or implied. Things like tattoos, long hair on men, or many African hairstyles being considered inappropriate or unprofessional. There are often expectations around noise levels as well. Many non-white cultures are more voluble, and this is considered normal. However, workplaces are expected to be quiet, which matches white culture. Other examples include the sorts of foods that are brought to eat. We have an expectation that our food shouldn't smell too much or smell differently. This again is different from the norm for many non-white cultures and can create friction in workspaces. Since the majority of managers tend to be white, any of these cultural violations could create issues for the non-white employees. Many of these same issues apply to class as well as race, partially because we tend to conflate race and class, but also because they apply to poor white people as well. We have a lot of stereotypes of poor people that feed into our biases about their intelligence and ability, as well as standards of behavior. This is part of why college degrees are so often required for a wide variety of positions. It's less about any knowledge gained from specific classes, and more about the class knowledge and connections gained during the course of a college education. In this case, we conflate a college education with a middle class or higher lifestyle. Poorer people also suffer from the same issues of uneven education access and higher rates of incarceration. These are both problems whose root cause is economic. We fund schools with property taxes, so poorer neighborhoods have less funding. Inability to take care of basic needs like food and shelter uh, from available legal work mean poorer people are more likely to be pushed into less than legal ways of making money. Poor white people are more likely to be rural, which makes access to regular employment and education more difficult logistically, particularly if you do not have a reliable vehicle. Class issues around work aren't limited to those in the lowest class of those, though. Middle and working class people have struggled lately as well. Globalization has moved many jobs overseas. Technology has taken over many jobs, particularly low-skill work, but also high-skill manufacturing work. Because of economic downturns in the last few decades, many older workers have put off retirement or are unable to afford to retire at all. There's been a significant decline in unions as well, meaning more available work is lower paid and there are fewer protections for workers. All of these factors mean that there are fewer positions available that provide livable wages, creating a squeeze on the middle and working class.